months after the U.S. bombed 3 of Iran's nuclear facilities. President Trump claimed the sites were, quote, completely and fully obliterated. Scripps News international correspondent Ollie Barrett is joining me now live from London for a bit more of what exactly the goals are for today's talks. Ollie?
Yeah.
Well, Stephanie, it was slightly unclear heading into the talks exactly what the goals were, but the talks have recently wrapped, and we have some sense coming out of the talks, therefore, about what has been discussed. In fact, Oman, which has been facilitating these discussions, say that they were consultations focused on preparing the appropriate conditions for resuming diplomatic and technical negotiations. So in that sense, these were talks about talks. Now, we've had some initial response from Iran's foreign minister, Mr. Agrachi, who says that these were a good beginning, these discussions, and he says teams are now heading back to their respective capitals with a view to further discussions in the future. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio had said heading into these discussions that you would need something meaningful would only happen out of these talks if the discussions went beyond the nuclear issue. Well, that was already a bone of contention because Iran had said heading into the discussions that they would only be about its nuclear program. The Americans wanted to discuss the nuclear program and the freezing of it. They wanted to discuss Iran's enriched uranium stockpile, but they also wanted to include discussions around Iran's ballistic missiles and its support for regional armed groups. So there are certainly some differences of opinion about exactly what the aim of these discussions were going to be. They have now wrapped, and as I say, the teams now, we understand, heading back to their respective capitals to brief their governments and work out exactly what happens next.
Talks about talks. So what a way for international diplomacy to try to move forward. But while those talks about talks have wrapped, the president has also been repeatedly threatening to attack Iran over their crackdown on anti-government protests. So where do things stand on that front?
Well, Stephanie, they certainly stand with the American presence in the region militarily being beefed up. President Trump has talked about what he describes as the armada of American assets moving towards the region for a military strike if one were to be needed. In terms of the crackdown inside Iran, it has been hard to know exactly how widespread, how brutal that has been, but almost every observer group around the world has concluded that it was widespread and brutal. Some groups believing that up to 7,000 people have been confirmed dead in the repression of the protests that broke out over issues including the poor state of the Iranian economy. Some estimates have that number much, much higher than that, and certainly observers also believe that tens of thousands of people were arrested in the crackdown of these protests. So that is not an issue that has gone away. And indeed, in the last 24 hours, Americans inside Iran have been urged by the U.S. to, in the words of American officials, leave now.
Okay, so let's go through this. I'm going to give you guys a quick little monologue overview of what the is going on here geopolitically and why you guys need to know this. Let's go ahead and talk about this, okay? Because there's a lot of moving parts here, so I want to make sure I give you guys a proper analysis here, okay? So as you guys know, we have to go back a little bit for this. The important thing that you guys need to understand, right, is that the United States had originally told Iran that they wanted to meet in Istanbul, Turkey to have talks. And in the talks, they wanted to talk about their ballistic missile program, their nuclear program, and their proxies, right? The support of the proxies, aka the Houthis, Hezbollah, and Hamas, as you guys know, and obviously the Bashar al-Assad regime, and the Iraqis as well. And the Iranians were backing all these different proxy groups. And in order for you guys to understand the proxy groups, you guys need to understand the position Iran is in. So it's ever since 1979, Iran has had a lot of problems with the United States, okay? And they've been able to insulate themselves and protect themselves from the United States and from Israel from 4 main weapons, okay? Number 1 is their ballistic missile program, one of the best ballistic missile programs in the world. Second, the acts of resistance, okay? Arming all these different proxy groups in different parts of the region that work together and wage war against Israel, who is the biggest enemy for Israel, alongside the United States, who backs them, right? Third, their nuclear program. Their nuclear program, as you guys know, they've been working on it for a while, right? And they signed on with the JCPOA, etc. But, you know, the JCPOA is pulled out of by us, and it's led to crippling sanctions that Iran is currently dealing with. And then last but not least is their ability to import pain from, economic pain, destroying oil fields, shutting down the Strait of Hormuz. And what they've basically been able to do, since they understand that they cannot necessarily beat the United States in a head-on war, the only thing they can do really is they got to make it where it's like, okay, if you fight us, we're going to lose, but we're going to make sure that it's going to hurt you a lot where you're not going to necessarily want to fight us. That makes sense, chat? So they practice something called asymmetric warfare, where their job is to make it as painful as possible for the United States, both militarily, economically, and politically, where basically the juice is not worth the squeeze. Okay? Now, it's important to realize that these four components, the nuclear program, their ballistic missile program, the acts of resistance, the proxies, and the asymmetric warfare, of attacking them economically and hurting them politically, etc. These things have been able to keep Iran safe for a very long time. Now, this all changed with October 7th. After October 7th, we saw the fall of Hezbollah. We saw the fall of the Hamas, right? Significantly disintegrated. We saw the Houthis have to kind of take a little bit of a backstep. We saw the Bashar al-Assad regime fall. And with the Bashar al-Assad regime falling, the IRGC were kicked out of Syria, which allowed for Hezbollah to kind of be on their own and just kind of bleed out because they weren't able to get the resources and equipment and personnel to assist. So what's left now is Iran, right? Because the proxies have been weakened, which is a big component. Their nuclear program has been hurt and pushed back when Trump bombed them back in the 12-day war. So the only thing really left is their ballistic missile program and the asymmetric warfare tactics. Now, the 12-day war, though, and I talked about this with my brother if you guys want more detail about this, but the 12-day war was good and bad. And the reason why it was, honestly, it's really all bad. And I'll tell you guys why. It was bad because the Iranians were able to fight back against Israel, but they were able to show their capabilities. And by showing their capabilities, they made the Israelis realize these niggas could f us up. Now, mainstream media didn't talk about this, but the Iranians pummeled Tel Aviv. Even though about 90% of the missiles were intercepted, the missiles that got through caused serious damage. And not only did the missiles cause serious damage, Israel and the United States depleted a roughly 25% of all their interceptor missiles. Okay? 25%. Now, I need you guys to understand that the Iranians used cheap drones, cheap cruise missiles, hypersonics, etc. They used an array of different ballistics. Okay? The interceptor missiles that they were using are significantly more expensive than the missiles that Iran sent over. Now, the other thing that you guys got to understand with these interceptor missiles is they're very difficult and expensive to make. The United States can make roughly only 20 a year. Yeah, that's not good. And they expended almost 25% of their entire inventory just on a 12-day war. So as you guys can see, the math ain't mathin'. Iran replenished all their missiles, pretty much. They're back to 100% levels of their missiles, damn near, of what they had before the 12-day war. Meanwhile, interceptor missiles are barely replenished because they can't make them fast enough, right? The American defense contractors can't make them fast enough to keep up with demand. So what does this mean? This means that in a war of attrition, the Israelis cannot defend themselves. And once they can't defend themselves, what's going to happen is, once the interceptor missiles are gone, now Tel Aviv is wide open. Haifa is wide open, okay? And that's not good. So now the Israelis first made it where, the nuclear weapons, bro. The nuclear weapons, bro. That's the biggest problem. You know what the biggest problem is now? The ballistic missiles are the biggest problem now. Because now, when Iran fought back, they showed their capabilities and they showed that they can touch Israel. And Israel bled for the first time in a very long time. And they don't like that. Because this is the first time that they've actually been challenged militarily in a very long time. Okay? And since the Iranians have the capability of not just attacking them, but actually hitting them, and hitting them long term, because in a war of attrition, they're cooked. The Israelis basically said the ballistic missile program has now risen from the second priority to the number one priority. The nuclear program is no longer the Israelis' biggest fear. Now it's the ballistic missile program. So the 12-day war, in one way, showed the Iranians' capabilities, but showing their capabilities made the Israelis scared. And the United States scared as well, because obviously Israel can be destroyed, right? So this puts Donald Trump in a weird position, because now that he knows that the Iranians can destroy Israel and his donors are all hardcore Zionists, it puts him in a precarious situation. Now, here's the other problem that no one's talking about, and I've noticed that mainstream media has not talked about this. After the Iranians got pummeled, because they did get pummeled in the 6-day war. Guess what the Iranians did? They went over to the Chinese. And they bought a lot of weapons. Okay? They got a lot of weapons. And not only did they get weapons, they got weapons that are specifically designed to combat Israel and the United States. We're talking radars that are specific to stealth aircraft. We're talking air defense that targets stealth aircraft. We're talking a completely revamped air defense system based on Chinese technology that's not as easy to hack. Yeah, because what ended up happening with the 12-day war was the Russians and the Chinese left the Iranians hanging, and they almost got destroyed. So the Chinese are like, you know what? It's probably not in our best interest to let the Iranians get destroyed by the United States and Israel. So we're going to come in. We're going to sell them weapons, because they buy 90% of Iran's oil, by the way. Okay? They circumvent the sanctions and they buy oil at a reduced price. And they need that oil even more now because Venezuela is off limits. I told you guys taking over Venezuela wasn't going to be good. I was one of the only people that told y'all that this is going to be a problem. Because now they're going to rely on Iranian oil more. Since they rely on Iranian oil more, they cannot allow the Iranians to fall. And they basically went ahead and revamped their entire air defense. That was Iran's biggest weakness, was their air defense and their air force. But now they got Chinese technology that's on par with American and Israeli technology that can actually combat it. And the reality is when your capabilities go up, the United States and Israel has to game plan differently. Because now B-2 bombers aren't going to be able to come in uncontested airspace and do whatever they want. Now there's a chance of being shot down. Now there's a chance of being identified. Now there's a chance of serious casualties. Now you guys also got to remember that Donald Trump cannot afford American casualties. Okay? So just the risk of a B-2 bomber being shot down or F-35 being shot down is a big problem, okay? People's memory is still very strong when it comes to Iraq, okay? We didn't forget Iraq. And a lot of Americans are getting red-pilled on how dragged us into that war. So the American appetite for another war in the Middle East and American soldiers dying to fight Iranians that, quite frankly, I think we all know at this point, don't really pose a threat to America, rather a threat to Israel, that's a very real problem that the Trump administration is trying to avoid. The American public is not going to be able to stomach American soldiers dying in another Middle East war, especially with how people are red-pilled on now. So this puts Trump in a very precarious situation because the Iranians have upgraded their air defense. And unfortunately, this conflict is going to be done all with the air. The air superiority that the United States and the Israelis had in the 12-day war, that edge has significantly evaporated. Now, am I saying that the United States can't successfully conduct airstrikes? No, I'm not saying that. They can absolutely still Iran up with airstrikes. But the problem is this. Now, there's significantly more risk because the Iranians have capabilities of identifying these stealth aircraft and shooting down these stealth aircraft, thanks to Chinese technology, which is on par with American and Israeli technology now, okay? They're not stuck in the 1970s anymore. They've revamped their entire air defense. Harder to hack, Chinese technology, more advanced, and worst part, it's all technology specifically designed to combat American air superiority and Israeli air superiority. That's the biggest problem. So it's not as risk-free. What was maybe a 10% chance of getting shot down has now risen up to 50. And those are not good chances. Okay? The war planners in the Pentagon don't like that. Now, here's the other ugly part. The United States has mobilized a bunch of assets in the region. That means that they got a lot of supply chain lines. Okay? What I tell you guys before, invading a country is always harder than defending. The Iranians are in their backyard. Okay? The Iranians can sink the Lincoln. They can sink an aircraft carrier easy. There's missiles all along the coastline stationed. And not only are the missiles stationed, they're on movable trucks. So they can fire a missile, move, load it up, and fire another missile. That's bad, okay? Also, people are saying, oh, the Strait of Hormuz, Strait of Hormuz. Guys, the Iranians could set mines all across the Strait of Hormuz, which would make commercial tanking undoable. Because once the Iranians start putting mines in the ocean, in the strait, now commercial ships aren't going to get insurance. If they don't get insurance, no captain is going to sail. Finito. And they don't have to fire a shot. Also, another important thing, and no one's talking about this either. The IRGC boarded, I think, 2 tankers. You want to know why they did that? They boarded them to see what response the U.S. would have. Now, what can happen when they board these ships is obviously the U.S. can scramble a destroyer to kind of come in and try to intercept. But here's the problem. Those destroyers are going to have to choose if there's actual war between saving a commercial ship or actually engaging in the warfare and protecting the destroyer. And they're not going to be able to do that every single time. It's going to be a very costly and inefficient way to spend your time when you're in the middle of an actual real conflict. And the Iranians proved that because the U.S. did not do anything when they took these 2 tankers. And I think they have like 12 of these guys held up right now. So where do we stand? We have a bunch of assets in the region. We attack, and the Iranians have said that this is not going to be a one-off thing. There's not going to be no symbolic strikes. This is going to be a regional war. And the Iranians have missiles that we can't defend against. We're talking about military bases being destroyed in the region. We're talking about allies getting attacked. We're talking about oil fields being destroyed. We're talking about the Strait of Hormuz being shut down. And it's fairly easy for them to shut it down, by the way. All you got to do is create a risk, and they're not sailing, guys. No freighter ship is going to sail without insurance. And all they need to do is just start putting mines in the water, and it's over. It's not hard to shut it down. We're talking about 20 to 30% of the world's oil going through that strait. We're talking about $10 gallons of gas immediately, okay? We're talking about potentially aircraft carrier being destroyed and sunk. 7,000 soldiers on board. 7,000 Navy men. 80 jets being sunk. These are very real consequences. And then retaliation or attacking is risky now because the Iranians have upped their air defense. And they've not just upped their air defense, they've upped their air defense in response to our strengths with this air superiority. So we'll see what happens, man. But I don't like it, chat. They had these talks, right? They had these talks today. And the U.S., just so you guys know, the U.S. was supposed to meet in Istanbul and they folded. They said, we're not going to meet in Oman. But last second, they met in Oman. You want to know why? Trump does not want to attack Iran. He does not. Their brinksmanship is being proven right now. He does not want to attack. He knows that if he attacks, he's on a regional war and it's not going to end well. U.S. soldiers are going to die. Gas prices are going to go up. And the U.S. public right now cannot stomach a war. They cannot. And they've already said this isn't just going to be a war against the United States. It's going to be a regional war. The Israelis are going to get hit too. They're going to bomb the U.S. military assets, which a lot of their best missiles are pointed at, by the way. And they're going to bomb Israel. So do we really want a regional war for what? Because Israel's crying about ballistic missiles? And that's why the Iranians also said, yo, we're not negotiating with you guys on ballistic missiles. It's not happening. We're not negotiating on the ballistic missiles, and we're not negotiating on the proxies. We'll negotiate on the nuclear shit only, right? But that's all they're going to negotiate on is the nuclear stuff. They're not going to negotiate on a ballistic missile program whatsoever. The ballistic missile program that they have, guys, is their strongest asset and is actually the reason why the United States is not attacking them. It is why Trump is thinking twice about attacking them, as a matter of fact, because he realizes that they can be destroyed, that the United States can take some serious damage from the Iranians. They have ballistic missiles that we cannot stop, okay? Very scary ballistic missiles that we can't stop. And they now have Chinese technology to defend themselves. So Trump's in a tough spot, guys. He's got two options. Either A, gets his bluff called, has to leave the region with his tail between his legs and look weak. B, attack Iran and risk a regional conflict. Or C, not do anything, try to continue diplomacy, and the Israelis attack anyway because the Israelis said that we're not going to accept anything less of their ballistic missile program being dismantled because they saw what happened on the 12-day war. So even if we say we're not going to get involved, we're going to back out or whatever, we don't have to negotiate the ballistic missile program, the Israelis are going to attack because the ballistic missile program has been proven to be an existential crisis for them because they can absolutely be destroyed by the ballistic missile program. So I don't know how we're going to get out of this, chat. We're in a very, very bad position. Very, very bad. War, it seems to me like it's inevitable. Even if they have talks, even if we negotiate, even if we sit there and we'll be like, yeah, we'll deal with the nuclear program, blah, 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 all this other shit. The Israelis don't give a about the nuclear program anymore. They care about the ballistic missile program because the 12-day war showed that they are not safe. And not only are they not safe, they don't have the ability to get the interceptor missiles to be safe, and they don't have enough time to get the interceptor missiles. It's going to take them somewhere like 7 years to replenish the interceptor missiles that they lost just in the 12-day war, bro. Niggas are cooked. And Israel's already said that the ballistic missile program is the #1 threat, and if we don't get rid of that, we're going to attack. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. But it's not good. But guys, that is the political nightmare that we're in the middle of. And it's crazy to me that I'm not seeing more people talk about this. But this is why Trump has been extremely reluctant with attacking Iran. It's a lose-lose, chat. So don't believe Fox News. Don't believe all this posturing. We're going to hit him hard and all this other bullshit. Right? Trump is scared of the retaliation. The Iranians are not playing around. They know that if a war starts this time, this is it. And they're preparing accordingly. And the crazy part is they have not used their best shit yet. It is the ballistic missile program that the United States and Israel are the most concerned about, especially Israel. They don't give a about the nuclear program no more. The proxies are weak. There's the ballistic missile program. The 12-day war, and now everything makes sense, right? It's all coming to circle. The reason why the Iranians were so reluctant to hit the Israelis back hard every single time they bombed the embassy or they assassinated an IRGC leader or a general or when they killed Hassan Nasrallah, whatever, when they killed Eshma Hanea, the reason why the Iranians were so scared to escalate and use their ballistic missiles is because they knew this was going to happen. They now made themselves a target. They went from the nuclear program to the ballistic missile program. Israel realizes that Iran can destroy them, and now they have the proof, and they're like, yo, we can't have these niggas here. These niggas don't just want us destroyed, they have the capability of destroying us. And now we see why the Iranians hid their power levels for so long with their ballistic missile program. Very impressive program. So we'll see what happens, chat. But we're in a very bad spot. And I don't see any of the American media reporting this. Either A, we run with our tail between our legs and look weak. You know Trump ain't going to do that. B, we negotiate the Iranians and we come up to a nuclear deal, but ballistics are off the table. Or C, we figure it all out and the Israelis attack anyway without American approval, which they will do. Which they will do if the ballistic missile program is not dismantled. So that's where we are, guys.